ultimately, if you had to, get out your crystal ball, and what would you think the state of AI would be 5 years from now?
Well, I mean, there are some predictions, like, there's some like YouTubers that I follow who are looking at reports from like the IMF and so on, which basically say that, there's no limit to the amount of jobs that AI could replace.
Yeah.
Um, so that's quite fascinating, and particularly if you combine with AI with robotics.
Yeah.
But often, you have these predictions; they don't come out to be as dramatic.
Right.
I mean, the positive plus side where we'd be like, oh, like actually we see this future where, we don't have to do drudgery,
Right.
anymore.
Like you have
basic
universal basic income. The
Yeah.
robots are doing 98% of the work or whatever. That part doesn't sound awful.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, one of my favorite essays that I wrote about a lot in How Soon Is Now is called The Soul of Man Under Socialism by Oscar Wilde. It's Oscar Wilde's only political essay. Yeah, and he basically argued that ultimately we needed automation so that people wouldn't have to just do drudgery. And eventually there would be a future where people would be freed for cultivated leisure. But it would be more of a socialist rather than a private property-oriented society.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it could be, obviously we're going to see some people become even more immensely wealthy. But if it becomes a case where, yeah, as you say, a universal basic income, some kind of peace dividend, some opportunity, that would be great. I mean, but then you have to also, that's the utopian option. But the dystopian options are also seem more likely.
Yeah.
I mean, I just read this book, The Coming Wave, by Mustafa Suleyman, who is one of the founders of DeepMind. And he talks about how AI could easily allow for what he calls infinitely stable dictatorships, which we're already kind of seeing with like China with the social credit system and so on. So yeah, one of the big, I think, lessons of the last, 15 years or whatever, there was a time like in the 90s, or even the early part of the beginning of the 21st century, where people thought that kind of open societies, liberal democracies were somehow going to triumph, like open markets, open societies. And now we're learning that dictatorships and totalitarian and authoritarian and theocratic systems also can do very, very well. They can have free markets in some ways, controlled as need be, but they can also use technology very efficiently to control and dominate populations.
Interesting. Where does all the extraterrestrial UFO stuff come in for you? I mean, obviously you've been tracking that for a long time in crop circles, and and of course we've seen this flurry of I don't know, acceptance and media coverage around it in the last couple of years. I'm just curious what you think about it all.
I think I must have a sort of weirdly rebellious or recalcitrant character streak because I really get fascinated with things when they're kind of on the outside, like the psychedelic thing. Now I find it a little bit appalling.
I hear you. Like, I get it.
The way, yeah. So with I somehow find myself a little dubious around kind of some of the government involvement now, and like the Grush, Dave Grush, and so on, and what kind of the actual agenda there is, and so on, whether it's like a diversionary tactic or something. I mean, when I wrote the 2012 book, I looked a lot at the crop circles.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, I guess I became convinced after a lot of study that for all sorts of reasons that there are probably messages there that are not human-made.
Yeah.
That some other form of consciousness, or it could be us in the future, or us in another dimension.
Yeah.
Or it's all us, according to Dzogchen Buddhism. Anyway, there's only one consciousness anyway.
Right.
That's like giving us clues about the nature of reality that I tried to understand in that book. So I think that, it sort of feels like we're in a sort of cosmic game or play, and the reveal is gonna, if it happens in some way that is not exactly how we think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Whatever the human mind can kind of
That's how you know it's not going to happen. If you think it's going to happen a certain way, that's your indicator. It'll be different. With most
I
things.
think so. I could, of course, I could be wrong about that too. That could be even more surprising. But so yeah, it seems to me there must be other forces in the universe or the multi cosmos or whatever, and but they have rules in ways in how they interact with us.
Yeah.
I also went down the whole rabbit hole around the gray aliens, the ones with the bug eyes, do the amputations. They seem a little bit sort of more like goblins or kind of interdimensional parasites.
Yeah.
That kind of prey on sort of the gaps in our understanding.
Yeah.
And are sort of seeking to kind of but then on some other level, we've also constructed this situation. These things get hard to talk about.
Yeah.
On a philosophical level, I'm a big fan of what's called analytic idealism, that I wrote about already in the Quetzalcoatl book. But one of the main proponents of it these days is this guy Bernardo Castra, who wrote a book called Why Materialism is Baloney, among other books. And essentially, analytic idealism posits that consciousness, not matter, is the foundational or the ontological primitive.
Right.
There's no reason to think that there was a physical or material universe, pre-conscious awareness.
Right.
So it's like, from this perspective, it creates a totally different framework, and it's a highly logical. He was like a scientist at CERN. He's not the only person who explored this idea, but he's been developing it very nicely. But it creates a totally different way of thinking about all sorts of phenomena. Basically there's just one consciousness expressing itself in all these different ways. It also accords very well with Eastern mysticism and Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. So yeah, there once again, it's like, is the alien other an aspect of ourselves that's just winking at us?
I think more likely that's my guess.
Yeah. And how do we get the joke? And what happens when we do get the joke?
Yeah, right.
Then what happens?
And is it going to be funny?
Yeah.
Or are they the only ones laughing? Yeah. I'm curious, have you had any direct experiences yourself with UFO or?
Yeah, I've had indirect experiences. It's been a while. I think that it's the kind of phenomenon where if you get very fixated on it, it begins to kind of move in your direction. But they're kind of like, I don't know if they bear recounting in a way, because they're more kind of like subtle, like I haven't been abducted or I've seen stuff in the sky. I've had dream experiences that were corroborated physically and so on.
Gotcha. And for those who aren't too familiar with the crop circle stuff, I find it very fascinating as well. And obviously you've went deep looking into this phenomenon. And of course we've all heard, it's guys with, wood planks, which there has been some of that mischief, if you will. So I just, I think it'd be cool to share a little bit of what your findings were related to that, for those who, don't know much.
Yeah. Well, I first wrote about it for Wired magazine. Then I spent a summer and a half in England in the fields, like visiting all the formations and so on. It's a long story. There's like 100 pages about it in the book, but there are physicists who did all these studies on the way the patterns are constructed, and like energy readings and the patterns and so on, who ended up publishing peer-reviewed science papers that demonstrated they really could not have been done by farmers with boards and string. There were like, different things happened to the molecular nature of the crop, and there were energy readings, and then also there was like extraordinary perfection of these huge patterns that would appear in one night or even a few hours. And the ones that the human hoaxers made are much more cumbersome and belabored, don't have the sort of sharp perfection, or like the kind of like it was very much it was like it was something that was really teaching. It's like a teaching about very precise attention in a way, and so that was part of it. It's been a while.
There's even messages that came through where there was like learnings from sort of what was shared, if I recall, and like at least one or two crop circles where it was like, oh, we didn't understand this particular mathematics or something. I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time since I've looked at it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Gerald Hawkins, who was an astronomer at Boston University, very early on in the phenomenon, discovered that the simple circles and shapes were teaching new Euclidean principles, paradigms, and that they were showing Euclidean theorems that no human geometer in thousands of years had discovered. He created a contest around it.
Yeah.
So that was a tell that you were dealing with like a superior intellect.
Right. That's pretty fascinating,
Yeah. I'm still kind of shocked like that nobody seems willing to really research it seriously.
Yeah.
From my perspective, there should be like some kind of institutional structure to send people out there. Like, I mean, there are these people who very carefully collected all the documentation and have done like charts of all the diagrams of all the patterns, all that stuff. It's a whole world. I mean, then it's also like a synchronicity vortex. Like when you get into it, you start to have you meet people in certain formations, or you get certain types of information. I mean, it was a wonderful experience. I mean, I still believe that you're dealing with a psychedelic phenomenon that bends time and space, and it's not simply just bored farmers.
Right.